Welcome to the Princeton Flying School Podcast from the right seat with Pete Rafle, Princeton Flying School Instructor Emeritus. In this episode, Pete shares a few flying stories and teaching tips gained from his 55 years in the air. Hey, Pete, I understand that Dick Nierenberg one time asked you a very interesting question about ashes.
Yeah, ashes to ashes. I got a call from Dick late in the week when I was I'd been instructing here for about 5 years, I guess. And Dick said, "Look, your first flight isn't until 10 o'clock, so could you come in early? We got something we want you to do for us." And I said, "Sure, I'll come in." Weather was nice, and I was just happy to come to the airport. And I came in and walked right down to Dick's office, and he said, "Okay, have you ever dumped ashes out of an airplane?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I got to show you how to do it right, because the last guy who tried to do it dumped all the ashes all right out of the window and took the paint off the horizontal stabilizer. And I'll be God darn if you're going to do that this time." And I said, "Well, I didn't do it the first time, so tell me how to do it." And so he went on to describe how to open the bag of the ashes. Now, the ashes are, if you've never seen the remains of a cremated person, it looks like sand and cinders from a coal stove, really. But they're small and very jagged. And the idea is that when you dump these, they must be at a level below the window where the slipstream of the airplane is going to take them below the tail and allow them to go in one large whoosh of ashy smoke, if you will. And I said, "Well, I can do this." So he showed me how to first, before you take off, you got to take the bag out, and we're going to snip off the top, the seal, the plastic bag. We're going to cut off that seal so it's an open bag with about 3 or 4 inches of the rest of the bag sticking above the level of the ashes. And you grab hold of one corner using your pinky finger, and you hold on to that real tight. Then you take the other and bring them in so you're holding them together with the other fingers. Now what you're going to do is, when you're ready to drop that off, okay, you've taken that and you folded it up to where the ashes are. If you can imagine this, the bag, when you release it, will be upside down, and you will have let go the entire empty bag facing down. So you're grabbing hold of one corner of the bag, and then you're bringing the top over and holding it together and pinching it. And it's got to be in your left hand, because that's the one that's going to be out of the window. And so I practiced in his office. And when he felt I was duly qualified and I had met the standards of Dick Nierenberg's School of Crematoria Disposal, he told me that you're going to do it this morning, because the funeral director is coming over here in about 20 minutes, and the family is going to be here too, and they're going to say goodbye to you. And, well, not you, they're going to be saying goodbye to whatever the guy's name is. And I said, "Do I have to just talk to them or anything?" He said, No. You go out there, pre-flight the goddamn airplane, and then come on back, and when we get the ashes, then you'll kind of nod to them solemnly as you go out to the airplane, and really give them some sort of honorary show, and then you will taxi out slowly with decorum. He didn't use that word, but he said, "Don't taxi too fast," and off you go. I said, "Okay, where am I dumping these?" He said, "You're disposing of them. You're dispersing them. You're not dumping them." And another expletive came out after that. He said, "Off a Sandy Hook, and check the GPS before you." And we had a very basic, it was a GPS 250 or something like that. It was one of the basic ones. I had coordinates. Make sure you write them down, because we got to put them on the certificate from the funeral parlor, because he's going to have to file this as where are the ashes, where they've been disposed, blah, 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 and we'll have to sign it and all that. So it's an official document. So don't screw up. And remember, get your hand right down there as far as you can reach outside the airplane before you give it that one little shot down, hanging on to the bottom of the bag so it all goes out in one big flow. Well, I'll tell you, my pinky finger on my left hand tends to lock up because I still imagine holding onto that bag as I let go of the ashes. Well, so the ashes arrive with the funeral director, very solemnly dressed in black, of course, and black tie. I remember him. And the family stood out on the ramp over by where the picnic table used to be, right here inside the fence, and. It was a cardboard box with a cap on top, one of those steel, one of those metal caps, looked like an oatmeal thing, but with a, okay. And so I went out to the airplane carrying I think his name was Sidney or someone, under my arm, and nodded very politely to the people who nodded back and seemed to be very appreciative that I was taking their dearly beloved out for a ride. I got to say, I've given thousands of rides in airplanes. This is the first time I ever came back without the guy I took. I mean, I've never taken parachutists out. I've never done that kind of stuff. So I went out the airplane, and I had done my pre-flight before they arrived, of course. Got in the airplane, and I went ahead and I snipped off the top of the bag, and I had Sidney sitting next to me in his seat, and it was one of the old 172P models, and started right up, taxied out, and took off. And I sort of prolonged the climb as I went by, and I saw them looking up at me, the family taking one last look at the vehicle that's taking Sidney to his hereafter. And I flew out to Sandy Hook, and I got out over the beach out there and went out about a mile or so, and I was only at about 2,000 feet, and I was trying to not pick a place, but trying to get myself ready. So this is a 172. I'm pretty good at trimming the airplane. I got it pretty where it was flying straight and level, not going up or down too much, and I quickly grabbed hold of that bottom and grabbed the other rest, folded it over, so I had that bottom of that bag firmly in my left hand. I sprung open the latch on the window so that the latch was open, the window, stuck my arm out and then down, and then when one quick thrust, I let it go. And I looked out over my shoulder, and there was nothing but this beautiful sort of grayish blue cloud dispersing behind the airplane and over some fishing boats down there. God knows what they thought was coming their way. And I quickly looked over at the little GPS, and I figured out what the coordinates were, and I flew back here with an empty box. And it was kind of one of those poignant, lonely moments in the airplane when I thought, that's not a bad way to be dealt with at the end. He's going to become part of the fishes and part of Barnegat Bay or something, whatever, where they'll drift down to that area. But it was off the coast and now part of the fishes. And I thought I did a pretty good job. I didn't chip any paint off the airplane.
Perfect.
But Dick never asked me to do it again, so I never got another opportunity.
I wonder if Sidney was a flyer or an aviator. Is that why they...
Well, I sort of thought that he was a nervous flyer, and this kind of, this would have been his best flight.
That's a good story. Any other interesting Dick stories you can think of, or other unusual tasks you were assigned?
Yeah, I remember once when we had a... I think I had been teaching here a couple of years. I was a part-time instructor for quite a while, and I'd do on the weekends. And I was working for a Japanese-owned company over in US 1 all week, and then I'd come over here to sort of try to loosen up and relax. And it was a windy day, very windy. It was a hell of a crosswind, and all all but one of the instructors had decided that it was really too strong for us to take any students up. And so we had been very judicious in canceling our flights to, you got to teach your student to know his capabilities. And the best way to do that is to demonstrate limits to your capabilities, perhaps. I've landed in some very bad crosswinds, but when you have a student on board, you don't want to show them that kind of risk or for Dick to ding one of his airplanes, okay? So it was a very practical decision of ours to just say, we're just not going to fly today. It's too much. But one of the other instructors, a part-timer who didn't live nearby, he was just here to fill in and such, had a student, and they took off and probably went out to the practice area for a while and kept doing his thing. And then they came back into the landing pattern, and I didn't know there was anything going on until I heard the second large, loud revving of the engine as it went around again. And I guess Dick must have heard it too, because this was before he had his little vehicle that he used to drive around in. He could still get around pretty much, but he was having problems with his hips. But he was making pretty good time for the front door, grabbed a radio off of the counter, and just charged out and through the gate and out onto the ramp, and started. We all followed because we knew this was going to be a good show. When Dick had a head of steam on, I'd like to be around and see what happens. And so we went out and followed Dick out, and the 172 was just about halfway up to the crosswind position and was about to turn crosswind, and the instructor was getting an earful from Dick of saying, well, I don't know if I can really repeat what he said, but he called him all kinds of nasty names and said, if you can't land here, maybe you should go somewhere else where you can get into the wind. And the instructor said, well, I'm going to give it one more try. And Dick said, well, you can try one time, and if I don't like it, you're going to Trenton. I don't care what you think. Well, he went downwind. It looked pretty good, but he was really scooting downwind, so we knew that the winds were pretty strong up there. And there is a wind gradient, from 1,200 feet of the landing pattern to the ground. The winds tend to reduce and turn. And he was having a terrible time maintaining a straight crab going downwind. So by the time he got to the beam position, he was already too far south of the airport, too far to the right. But he turned anyhow. And then now he's in the effect of the wind because the crosswind was coming out of the north, and so it took him forever to get to the final approach course, and he finally did. But it was obvious he was having a terrible time trying to maintain lineup on the runway, and he was crabbed pretty severely to the right trying to maintain that, but he was still drifting, towards our line of sight from the ramp, so we could look down there, and there he was. Just kind of drifting back to Princeton again if he didn't. Well, he got down to about 300 feet, and that was low enough for everybody, including Dick, who said, get your ass out of here. You're going to Trenton, and we're going to send a truck for you. Maybe. And he added power, and off he went, and he did make a successful landing on runway 34 over at Trenton, and I think it was about 20 minutes or a half hour later, I said, hey, Dick, do we have a truck to pick that guy up? I don't know. I give a damn. If we find somebody to go over there, we'll do it. But and he just stormed back to his office, and that was the end of that. And it probably was the end of the instructor too, because I don't think I ever saw him in the back. I never saw him land here again. I think he was off our payroll for poor head work or something like that.
And the moral of that story is know your limitations.
Know your limitations.
And watch out for Dick.
My rule is when the staff that holds the windsock is moving visibly, so you can see it actually moving with the wind gusts, it's time to, grab a cup of coffee and maybe do a ground lesson or by that time, sometimes the students have called and said they're not coming anyhow, but you have to be visible and exert your authority as the safety
That's
officer.
pretty cool. When you were at your retirement party, I remember, didn't you have some sort of a when students land, you wait to hear a certain sound?
I'll tell you where that came from.
What is
actually,
that all about?
My tire squeak noise really is my grandfather, Abe Hattenbach, used to like to push he would pretend that little babies' noses are buttons, and when he pushed it, he'd make that noise. He had lots of other noises too. He was a jokester. He was a salesman in New York City, and he had jokes for everybody. But he loved to play games with children, and that sound and being able to replicate it had been a pretty happy time for me, especially with my own kids growing up. But with just about every baby I see, I do the same thing. And then when I started instructing, I realized that is the sound of a perfect landing. And so I guess I get known for doing that. But to try to teach a landing and give them the sound that they can remember and see if they can match it has proven to be pretty good. So
this is your goal.
So I keep going around, you know.
What sound do they often achieve, or what?
Or a clunk clunk, clunk clunk clunk, and then some inane statement like, "I thought any landing you could walk away from was a good one." And I said, no, that's not quite the way it works. Cessnas are very forgiving, though, in landings. And if you can maintain a constant airspeed on final and just use power judiciously to keep your descent rate at the right point, you have your eyes all the way to the end of the runway just before the flare, and you keep your eyes at the right spot, you can generally let the airplane just settle onto the main mounts. There's no saying that you can learn to fly in a week, but it'll take you a lifetime to learn to land. That's probably what most of us go through. It's like golfers who quite never get rid of the shank, but it is doable and easy enough to learn with practice. It takes a lot of landings to get it right. It's interesting because when in the Navy, where I learned to fly initially, all the landings were pretty much firm, and it was just they were getting us ready for carrier landings, which everyone is a controlled crash actually. But it wasn't until I flew P3s, which was a 4-engine turboprop airplane, a big airplane, 126,000 pounds, and I could get that to squeak pretty well, and but it a lot of power and it just took a technique. But I really didn't learn how to really land an airplane until I went to work for Pan-American and flew the 707. And that airplane, to me, it appeared to me that it just knew the right attitude to take in close in the flare. And there you've got 8 tires, 4 on each side. So it kind of, but everything settles on the main mounts, where it just was one big, and then you would just let the nose fly down to the ground. But you have 8,000, 9,000 foot runway, so you have time to do that. But I've enjoyed landings. I think that's my favorite time of the whole thing. It really is the one time as an instructor, where I can see a finesse that a student has. And for myself, it's just to try to make this one as perfect as I can. And sometimes the winds aren't going to help you, or sometimes there's a distraction of something that happens that causes it not to work right. But I would say I get pretty good percentage of decent landings out of an airplane.
So do you find that the smaller airplanes are actually harder to land? Or how are they different than the big ones?
There's a certain stability that large airplanes have that small airplanes do not have, and so it takes a lot more of small corrections seem to be more important with little airplanes. Small corrections are very important with big airplanes too, but to keep a smaller airplane where you want it, given wind gusts and such. You have to be in the moment. It's the Zen moment of flying, and it's the analog pilot is what I call it. It's being in touch with not the digital world, not the synthetic world, not the
no autopilot.
Yeah, no autopilots. It's just fly the airplane. Seems to be the best thing to do. 55 years of doing this stuff, that's what happens. I have a way of putting an airplane on the ground. It's hard for me to describe it, but I know when it's not being done right, and I can help a student do that. Tailwheel airplanes are another matter, and that's a totally different process. The angle of the airplane, the speeds are very deliberate. Your eyes have to be out on the runway, out far. You can't look too close to the airplane and make sure you can get it on. Some tailwheel airplanes require you land on the main mounts. We call those wheel landings. I flew a Stinson Model 10 here in 1940 model that was I could land at 3 points, but the wheel landing seemed to be the best way to do it. Just come in more level and just descending in a more or less level attitude. Let the main wheels touch. As they touch, the throttle comes back, and the airplane, and then just ease the nose forward to maintain that. And as it slows down, the tail will settle, and then you get that little back there instead. But so you get two of them with the first one, for the little one in the back, and you can do that. Gliders are very similar to a wheel landing. In a tailwheel airplane, there the airspeed is very critical because you're trying to get you're at your max gliding, your proper gliding speed, and you've got to hold that to get you to the runway. So having a little glider experience always helps. Tailwheel helps, I think, tri-school gear pilots learn how to use rudder. So both of those, rudder and learning rudder, is very important for private pilots who tend not to know what to do it initially, and we have to teach them how to use that.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
What if we were to shift for a moment and think about perhaps a tip, a word of advice that you could give to students that are in the process of getting their private license, or instructors who are young and just getting started. I wonder if there's any, with how many landings you've made and how many years you've been teaching.
Yeah, every
Do you
student.
see a common mistake or situation?
So the first rule of landing consistently is to create a stable glide path. Try to maintain airspeed and control descent with power. And of course, if there are gusts coming, that will cause you to deviate from the proper glide slope. But it doesn't take long to put those two together, but it takes practice. And what I think initially, pilots need to do lots of practice landings. And so I wouldn't be shy about doing a full hour of landings with a student. Once they've been able to master, they can maintain altitude in the landing pattern, and they can do all those other basic things. Then to get them to see the picture, I could demonstrate it, then they practice it and then talking. And the one thing about an instructor is we have to keep talking the entire time, and the student can only absorb just so much. And so key point for the instructor is be aware of when your student has shut down. And so for many students, 45 minutes is about all they can handle in an airplane. And if it's a particularly, it's windy but controllable day, a day for instruction, but the winds are not calm, they can tire more quickly. So it's incumbent upon an instructor to know the limits of the student. And some students are just bulls; they can keep doing it. But others, you really have to watch for that. When a student stops talking back, in other words, stops answering questions or responding to you, then you know that you've lost them.
That's a good piece of
That's
advice.
also a sign that he's about to get sick, which is another matter.
You have to know the difference between those two.
I take great pride. I've only had to wash out, I think, 1 or 2 airplanes the entire time I taught. So when when a student is having a problem. So it's
That's pretty good.
not always, but mostly.
Yeah, that's true. I guess. How about? Just curious if you've ever had somebody who comes to take a lesson or to get started, and they just don't have it in them for some reason or another. They're either they get airsick too much, or I wonder what might deter some people from continuing their lessons.
Well, there were some people here who made fun of me, and I have a reputation here of having told a few people it was time to buy a boat.
That's what I'm asking.
And
yeah.
I have done that, but it was after quite some time. But because you don't want to discourage someone who has a dream of flying, but there are people who just are not adaptable to flight. I've always believed there were no born airmen. I think you have skills that can be used to accomplish this, but not everybody has that. And you can be taught how to do it, but then there's that inner drive that makes you want to do it. And sometimes the want and the talent sort of create a formula that says, time to buy the boat. I had one student who was, remain nameless at this point. He was a lovely guy. I really, really enjoyed spending time with him. But I realized it was a point that he just wasn't going to get beyond. He was reluctant to get into the cross-country phase. He soloed, had a very nice solo flight. There were 3 nice landings. And then we had supervised solos after that. But it was time to go cross-country, and he would cancel on me. Or something would come up, and there was weather delays, and then there were business delays. He always had some excuses, and I realized that things were not going to happen according to my schedule and the syllabus. And then one day he came, and he was still current, and he went out and took 172 up in the landing pattern to do a little practice, which was perfectly fine. And he had my signature in his logbook that said he could do that. All instructors understand the weight that comes with that signature in a student's logbook, and it's implied permission to go and do it, son. And he went out, and he had a couple of good landings. I was not here at the airport at the time. And then the final landing, he bounced. And our post-accident interview revealed some things. But basically what happened was he bounced the first time, and then contrary to the instruction I had given, he didn't go round. And he landed, and the airplane bounced again. But this time, the nose dropped into the classic porpoise. And I think he got 1/3 bounce out of that, but that's the one that got the prop. But didn't stop the engine. Okay? So the prop hit the pavement, but it didn't stop. So he kind of scooped out of it, apparently. But the airplane now was on the ground. And so he taxied in and was about to, he taxied into the parking area and positioned the airplane so he could push it back in, shut it down, and got out. At the same time, Dick Nierenberg was doing his daily patrol of the ramp and had witnessed the event.
Oh, no.
And he had spotted the porpoise. And so he went out, and I believe he had his little cart at that point. He drove up to him and said, "So how was that landing?" "Oh yeah, it was a little rough. I just, I don't know. It wasn't my best." And Dick said, "Why don't you take a look at the prop?" And he saw the prop, and he said, I got to tear that engine down now. That's going to cost you." He said, "What's my deductible? How much do you want?" And Dick said, "It's going to be $5,000. And he said, "Let me tie up the airplane. I'll come to your office, write you a check." And he did. And he never came back to the airport.
Yeah.
So I called him after I'd heard about the incident. I heard it from Dick, of course. "What the hell?" So I explained to him. I showed him, some notes that I had about the student, and I was about to tell him to find something else to do anyhow. Too late. But when I talked to the student, he said, "Pete, all I could do is hear your voice. Avoid the porpoise. Avoid the porpoise. Don't. If it bounces, don't get out of there. Add power. Go. Get out. On the first bounce, you got plenty of energy. You're still flying. Get out." He said, "But I just watched it happen. I just observed." Now we have one of these, safety attitudes. One of the attitudes we call it a hazardous attitude is resignation. And resignation is when someone says, "There's nothing I can do. This is out of my control. This is beyond anything. I'm just going to have to let it happen because it's just a mental giving up." And he did. Luckily, the airplane, he was probably a little slow when it happened. So if he had been faster, or if he had been, he was just damn lucky not to have the thing worse than it was. Didn't go off the runway, didn't get smushed. But he said, I had a wonderful time learning how to fly, and this isn't for me. And I know you've had some doubts about my being able to do this, but you've been so kind and so helpful. I just felt I had to keep trying. But he said, now I know what you're saying, I'm just not going to do it anymore. And I never saw him again.
Wow. Maybe he was in one of those fishing boats over the Sandy Hook.
Maybe he got the dust on him. Yeah,
he got dust
dusty
on
deck. Yeah.
Hey, listen. In wrapping up today, how about we wrap up today with something a little more positive than bad landings. Interesting aircraft. One of the aircraft that you have flown. Don't you have a historic plane that you sometimes fly? Or
well, I've flown an L6, which is an interstate cadet, which was 1942. Looks like a big Piper Cub, really, that type of airplane. High wing, fabric covered, long. I flew that for a while, and then I transitioned and that was a tandem, pilot in the front, passenger in the back. Then I transitioned to an L9, a Stinson Model 10, which the Army Air Corps called a Stinson 10. Well, it was a Stinson 10A that they called the L9. I'm sorry. And that is owned by this Commemorative Air Force. And so it was used by the CAP, the Civil Air Patrol, during World War II as an anti-submarine aircraft. They ran patrols out of Virginia and along the New Jersey coast, actually all up and down the Atlantic coast. But this airplane specifically was used in Virginia. And they would go out a few miles out to sea and run a regular track with this, looking for surfaced German submarines.
Wow.
Between 1941 and 1943, it took the Navy to around 1943 to get the small jeep carriers and the anti-submarine task forces put together, which was usually a small aircraft carrier, probably TBMs or single-engine carrier-type airplanes, a couple of destroyers, and maybe an accompanying submarine as well, to go out and search for U-boats. In 1943, when the Navy initiated that anti-submarine task force concept, the CAP, which were civilian pilots flying their own airplanes were just told to go home and stop doing this. And this was one of those airplanes. The nice thing about it was side by side with a steering wheel, rather than a yoke, rather than a stick. The L6 had a stick. This one had a little wheel. What I found troublesome with it was that the diameter of the steel in the wheel was too small. It wasn't very comfortable to hold on to, and it was very difficult to trim. So you're always holding pressure flying the airplane. And we would do, just at the air shows, we would do a 20-minute shtick where we'd all take off together and around the airport for 5 or 6 loops or whatever, and entertain the crowds before the big heavy iron arrived or something. But the announcer would give the history of each one of these airplanes that actually saw service. Now the airplane we flew never found a submarine, but it was the CAP during the period that they were doing it did find they sunk one submarine and found a couple more
close to the shore of
the German Navy would bring the U-boats in pretty close to where the shipping lanes were up and down the coast, and then they'd have to charge their batteries, and if they couldn't do it at night, because nighttime was the best time for them to do it, but there were times when they would actually be up in the early morning and early evening, and actually on the surface running the diesel engines, charging the batteries. And that's when most of them were caught. And with 5 years of my Navy experience of chasing submarines, mostly nuclear boats, but some fleet snorkel diesel boats, most of our sightings were visual also. Although we did find them electronically, we had sonar capability. So it's kind of ironic that I ended up flying one of the first anti-submarine airplanes. After on active duty, I flew the most modern one that the Navy had at the time, the P-3, which was a wonderful airplane to fly too. That was 16,000 shaft horsepower. I thought that was a pretty nice little airplane, and it had lots of. We had a crew of 13, so it was really a social event as well, which is really
pretty cool.
One of my things is to look out the left window and see rows and rows of engines, and look off to my right and see rows and rows of co-pilots. To me, that's the ideal airplane. And the P-3, the 707 was kind of like that.
Big. Yeah. Well, maybe we can wrap it up for today, and the next time we get together to talk about these things, you can tell me about your transition from those type of aircraft into the story that of Naomi and your wife. And sure. Next time we can get into that. Let's leave that as the cliffhanger, because from going from the Navy type of experiences to the service airplanes that you were flying to here probably was an interesting transition.
Okay, that's a deal. We'll do that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hey, you're welcome.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of From the Right Seat with Pete Rafle. This podcast is sponsored by the Princeton Flying School at Princeton Airport and is produced by HG Media. If you enjoyed our show, please share it with your friends and be sure to give us a thumbs up on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to our podcast.